Okay, so now we turn our attention towards backrank mate. And backrank mate is quite a self-explanatory term. It basically refers to any situation where the king, either the white or the black king, where the king is checkmated along the back rank, right? In this case, black is the one who is going to fall for a back rank mate. We can say that that is his first rank. So let's take a really simple starting example. This position was taken from Blitz game. And here, black played the move rook to b8. And in doing so, the problem was that the rook is hanging, right? In other words, it can be captured. And indeed, in this position, white captured the rook. And all of a sudden, back rank mate is unavoidable because you have no escape squares. This pawn or this pawn were advanced, then there would be the possibility of escaping. But actually, the problem is that the only pawn that is advanced is this pawn here, but unfortunately, there is control of this g7 square by the white pawn on h6. So, okay, of course, black could continue with the move bishop to c8, and after queen takes c8, if he wanted to be really stubborn, he could play queen d8. But of course, it's going to eventually be checkmate. So here's an example, the first example of backrank mate. Let's look at a couple of slightly more complicated examples. So here we have an example where the back rank is a lot more subtle, but clearly it's white who has the potential back rank problems because, as we can see, all of his pawns are standing in front of the king. So there is no easy escape if black were to check him along the back rank. Of course, with either rook or queen in this case, the danger piece is this rook on c8 that may, in some cases, give this check on c1. White was not alert to this possibility because it seems like, he has a rook here and it's safe. And so he didn't consider that there could be any problems. And he played the move knight e5. But in fact, this is a blunder. The problem with the move is that it leaves this knight here on d2 undefended, and combined with the rook on e1, they're both placed along this vulnerable diagonal. In chess, we usually say from the starting square from the white side, so from e1 to a5. And because of this, black has the very strong move bishop to b4, pinning the knight. Now the knight cannot move because the rook will be captured. So what to do? Well, white could, for example, play the move knight back to f3, but it's too late. Black would play knight to e4, continuing to put pressure on this knight on d2. And the problem is that it's white's back rank mate issue, or the threat of back rank mate, that costs white a lot of material. Because if, for example, he were to play the move rook d1, now black would simply capture on d2, then another capture, and then finally capture again. The problem is that if white captures once more, we see the king with all of his pawns on their starting squares. Notice how that is not the case for black. And so rook c1 with check would in fact be mate. Next move after rook d1, rook takes d1 is mate. So because of this, white actually loses basically on the spot following the move knight e5, because in this position after knight e5, bishop to b4, white also cannot play rook to d1, because if so, bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop, and rook c1 is once again checkmate. What else to do? In fact, I don't think that there's anything else. The knight can only be defended in several ways, either by the rook, but this does not matter. In either case, it'll be met by bishop takes knight, followed by the lethal check on c1, or knight to f3, but then the pin is not broken, and so black simply increases the pressure on the knight on d2, and it is too much. There's perhaps one more line worth checking out. If knight f3, knight to e4, if white captures here, black's best bet In fact, both moves, bishop takes e1 and d takes e4, they both win. But in my view, black's best bet is simply to capture here on e4. It's very simple. And the point is that once again, there is a double attack on the rook on e1 and on the knight on f3. And the only way to deal with that is rook takes e4. But once again, we see the rook lifting up from its control of the back rank. And so after rook c1 check, the only way to deal with the check is to block with the knight on e1, or possibly with the rook on e1, of course, but that would be even worse. And simply after bishop takes e1, we can say that black is up a clean piece. So this is no good. And so really we can say that after the move knight to e4 in this position, black is simply winning. So let's take a look at another couple of examples now. Here's another very tricky position from one of my own games. And in fact, I was black and was very, very fortunate not to lose this game. Because in this position, white feels like he has a very, very good position. And indeed he does. He's actually winning. But there is one problem. And that is that if he were to play the natural move that he'd like to play, queen takes d4, he would be losing because of backrank mate issues, or at least backrank issues in general. After queen takes d4, black would play rook to c1 check. And notice that in this case, even though white does have this pawn on h3, the white king cannot access h2 because the black queen is controlling this square. So white therefore would have had no choice but to play a move like queen to d1. But after this, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, and queen takes bishop on e7. Game over. So the back rank threat is what makes the position somewhat complicated. Otherwise, white would be simply up a piece. The second problem for white is that if he plays rook takes bishop, in this case, we can say that the square c1 is covered against any rook c1 check ideas. But the problem with rook takes d4 is that after rook takes d4, we see this bishop is hanging. So queen takes e7, and there is no extra piece for white. In fact, he's down a pawn, so only black is calling the shots here. However, white had one winning move in this position, and that was the move bishop to f8 check, an intermezzo move. And the point is that here, the black king would basically have to go to f6 to keep the game alive. But if the king goes to f6, then white would simply play rook takes d4. And now the key difference is that in the previous line, we saw that black could grab that bishop. This bishop that is on f8 was previously on e7. So here that's not the case, and so white is winning because he's up a piece, and that's very, very significant here in this position. I just want to point out one more thing, which is if after the move bishop f8 check, black were to go king to g8, now if white were to capture this bishop, then black would be attacking this bishop on f8. And so it would be level material, or in fact level pieces, but black would be up a pawn. That would be good for black. But unfortunately, white has the move bishop to h6 with check. And the next move, black will have to block with his queen. There is nothing else. And this position, in fact, is another example of a mate along the back rank. So hope you enjoyed that one, and let's show another little bit more complicated example now. Now, this example is a little bit more complicated, and it's also a little bit more painful than my usual examples, because this was a game that I lost, and I was up a piece. And yeah, it's never fun to lose, but when you're up a piece, it hurts that bit more. White should simply have played a move like queen to b8 here in this position, and black really doesn't really have any major threats. Black's best bet would probably have been to capture this pawn. Knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, and after a move like queen to c7, white breaks this pin that was bothering him, and sooner or later the knight will jump back into the game. So the position will be winning for white with that extra piece. However, instead of the move queen to b8, white in this case me, I played this move knight takes d4 instead. And this was a very bad idea. In fact, I'm immediately losing. Instead of capturing this knight, black had played a much stronger move, rook takes knight. And the thing is, up to here I had seen this and I didn't think that it was a big deal. Because I played now the move queen to b7 and I thought I was being very smart. The reason for this is that the queen is attacking the knight, but my queen is attacking the rook. So therefore, if he plays queen takes knight, I will simply play queen takes rook with check, and I'm up a clean rook. And so I thought I would be winning very, very soon. But unfortunately, a nasty surprise awaited me. After rook takes c8, queen to b7, in this position, black instead showed that white has some backrank mate problems. He played the very, very nice move, queen takes rook. And it's mate in one, it's mate next move. Because if white goes king to h2, black will simply play queen g2 with mate. And so in my case, I captured the queen, but now we see an example where I don't have, let's say, pawns on e2 or g2, but this pawn right here on f3 is controlling both of these squares. So therefore, rook c1, checkmate. And very, very nice checkmate indeed. So I hope you enjoyed this example. Certainly, I suspect you enjoyed it more than I did at the time, being on the receiving end of a very, very nice combination. And that basically concludes our look at backrank checkmates. It's a very basic concept in principle, but as you can see, there are varying degrees of difficulties. So you should be alert to any themes involving checkmate along the back rank, from the simplest of examples that we saw at the beginning to ideas like sacrificing a queen to capture, to bring the king onto a very dangerous square like f1, and from there leveraging a sort of a pawn wedge here on f3. So keep an eye out for them in your games because it's a very, very common and important theme to be familiar with.